Welcome back to another pen talk, and it's going to be vintage in this talk. And I'm going to focus a little bit on history and a little bit on nibs and only on Watermans. So I've done the Parker striped dual-fold vacuumatics. They've done the Waterman's Patrician, and Waterman certainly made a great variety of pens, so there is a lot of material to go over. So what started me on this video were these two pens here, which are number 7s. And this is also a number 7. As you can see, it's a little bit different in size. So the first number 7 came out, check my notes, in 1927 in the hard rubber ripple. And what the number 7 did, and I'll show you what the ad looks like, they advertised 7 nibs for a $7 pen called number 7. Originally it was only 6 nibs, but then they increased the number of nibs. So I have an example of a purple, a blue, and even though this has a band at the top, this pen has seen some better days, so it just has a regular nib in it. And here is a pen from Waterman's later in the 40s, which I think also has a very interesting nib, and I wanted to compare them to these other ones here. The other historical thing to note is these were obviously hard rubber, ebonite. You know, Waterman certainly had a franchise on the ripple pattern. These were celluloid, and these are some of the first early celluloid pens that Waterman produced, and they were only in black. The number 7 line, I can't really find an end date on it, but I think it ended late 30s. I don't think it made it into the 40s. Into the 40s, they were producing more pens like this, which I think had a lower price point, but still offered a good writing experience. Taking that one aside, this is the pen that supposedly the number 7 was based on, which is the model 55. And as you can see, it's very similar in size to the ripple. But supposedly the nib is a little bit bigger, so let's take a look at that and see if we can agree with what the historians say. Most of my history is from Richard Binder, so we'll take a look at that. And I would say he is correct. That number 7 nib is certainly bigger than the one on the 55. Let's compare it to this number 7. And again, as you can see, the nib is just slightly longer. But you should notice one interesting difference is the difference between the breather hole and the end of the tines, and that really indicates flexibility. So the purple nib here on the right is a stiff nib, and it certainly lives up to its reputation, and the nib on the left here is a classic Waterman nib. As we compare it to the other number 7 that I have, and we'll line those up, I got nice sunlight coming in, so I'm going to try to take advantage of that, and of course holding 3 pens is more difficult than holding just 2. Blue one is an excellent nib. That's the first number 7 I started writing with. You can see there's some ink on the nib. It tends to have nib ink creep, whatever you want to call it. So as you can see, that nib is not quite as long, but it's certainly more flexible than the purple one and not as flexible as the unmarked standard Waterman nib on the far left. Let's see if I can hold 4 pens together. I should have thought this through and some kind of holding device. So now we have the 4 nibs. The one on the far right here is the 1940s nib, and it's a beautiful nib. As you can see, it's not quite as wide, but certainly has some long tines on it and has some nice tipping material on the end. All of them have a very similar, we'll call it the Waterman spoon feed, which gives excellent ink flow, no starvations, no railroading, and you can again see the interesting nice tipping material that's on those nibs. I first inked up the number 7 purple pen after doing my normal restoration. It wouldn't write. I mean, not at all. I originally thought I didn't have any ink in it, so I tried to refill it again, and it still wouldn't write. So I looked at the nib under a loupe and saw that there was a gap in the tines. I mean, they basically were completely parallel with a pretty good gap, and obviously the ink wouldn't bridge that gap. The cohesion of the ink was broken. So I removed the nib from the section. It was easy to do with the little gripper. And I just worked it all around. You know, I did the fingernail thing, I did a whole bunch of stuff. Eventually it started touching right at the very top, and put it back in, and then it wrote fine. So I just want to let you guys know that as much as I love my vintage, they do require some special attention every once in a while, but I think the rewarding of the writing makes it worthwhile. I have from 1929. It's in the Hearst International Cosmopolitan. I'm not familiar with the magazine, but it shows the 7 nibs, $7.7. Doesn't actually show the width of the line that you'd get out of it, but it certainly discusses the type of pen that they were trying to go after. Let's see if we can get a little bit of a close-up, and we'll... So I have a purple one, which we will show on how it writes, and I also have a blue one. So, you know, the rendition of the nibs is pretty good. There's that pink one, which is the holy grail for some people. Red one would probably work well. I've never found a yellow one. As you can see, they tried to cover, you know, the gray one I think I'd love because it's an oblique point. Can't imagine how the green one is. This is tempered to armor plate. I think I saw an ad where they kind of illustrated that. So, and it kind of, you know, shows the different people and what they're doing. So I just find it interesting to take a look at the ads and how Waterman probably advertised more than anybody else, at least from the ads that I've ended up possessing over time. This is a catalog page from 1933 catalog that shows the number 7. They made a pencil, you know, and it shows the designation at the bottom of the barrel with the number 7 and the color for the nib. Just classic pen that they produced in the late 20s to mid 30s. The 1936 is the other catalog I have. As you can see, here's the number 7. There's that striped version, which we may remember from the patrician thing video that I did. Here's Juliet, no number associated with it. There they describe the different nibs. And as we come over here, we see other variations on the pen, and this one's calls it a 94. You know, there's moss agate, green pearl, and a number 5, which is a smaller version of the number 7. Referenced in the past. Very nice book, very reasonable. It has in it just a lot of ads, not a lot of educational material. But one of the things that I found was interesting was the Model 94, which looks very, very similar, in fact, almost identical to the Model 7. And as you can see, it had that insert, but here it only showed the 94. And I don't know whether the insert was colored to correspond to the nibs or not. And as we flip ahead, this is 1940s pen, and this is the Stalwart, which is as close as I can find in this book to the pen that I have. Obviously, I have a fuller size pen. It's in gold trim, but it has 2 bands on it, and it's a solid color. And you can see they made a great variety of pens in the 40s, and I think all of them can be found with excellent nibs and be excellent writers. I'm going to start with the Ripple, which is number 7. This is a standard, nice, soft nib from Waterman. It can lay down a nice fine line. It takes no pressure to write with. They write first time every time. but with a little bit of pressure, that nib will just open right up and lay down a lot of ink. So this is the standard that I would judge the other pens against. Like I said, this pen has lots of issues. It has no clip. There's only a few threads that catch. As you can see, the color variation there between what was covered by the cap and what's been exposed to sunlight and oxidation. I cleaned it up as well as I could. As you can see, that ink stays very wet for a long period of time. To me, that's one of the challenges with working with these very flexible wet Waterman nibs, is they lay down a lot of ink. The ink I'm using is the same ink on all these pens, which is Lamy Turquoise. So now I'm going to go to the Model 55, which is probably 10 years older. So we'll call it previous generation. And hopefully you can see that this lays down even more ink than the other number 7 did. Just a really soft nib. It writes first time every time. Absolutely no trouble getting some nice line variation out of it. I would call it a flex nib, but certainly, you know, that's a relative term nowadays. But just to put those in perspective. So this is a number 7. This is number 7 in blue. This is the stub, and I think of all my nibs, this is really one of the nicest ones of this group. And it's a soft stub. You know, as typical with this stub, you get a very, very fine line going horizontal, and with no pressure, you get about 2 or 3 times the line size, but then you just add a little bit of pressure to it and it gets quite wider. So I think this makes it a very unique nib, and not a nib that I think you're going to find on any modern pen. You can get some very nice line variation without doing much. And I think with this Lamy Turquoise ink, it looks nice. All these nibs I did a little bit of smoothing on to get them just that touch better. I mean, they were okay without the smoothing. So now we're going to go to a completely different nib, which is the purple, which is described as a stiff nib. So this is purple. I think you can see right away the different line that this one lays down. No pressure. Horizontal and vertical are pretty much the same. If you add a little bit of pressure, you get nothing. I mean, this is stiff. This is stiff like the Schaefers of the day and some of the Parkers of the day. It's a very smooth writer, good flow, and you can write small, which some people like, or you can write large depending upon your preference. You're just not going to get that same type of line style like we got with the other one. You can see that difference there between it. And also with the same ink in all of these pens, you get the things, put those things in perspective. So now we're going to look at this pen. And one of the reasons why I'm showing you this pen is these are a Schaefer model that I don't think too many people care about. They don't collect them. And I think that that leaves opportunities for people that want to get into vintage. And I think this is a stalwart. I mean, I haven't found anything. I'll show you here a page out of my Waterman book that nothing matches up exactly. And this is in a nice maroon color. It cleaned up very nicely. Didn't require much work. And this has a broad nib. And this is the smoothest nib of the bunch. I mean, this is as smooth as any modern nib that you're going to find. And it lays down a pretty good line. I mean, you still get a fairly fine line in the horizontal, and with no pressure you get a decent, which is very similar to the to the blue stub nib, which is why I wanted to put this one up. And then you put a little bit of pressure on it and those tines open up and you get some good ink flow. So considering, like I said, this pen is not necessarily collectible, the number 7s are kind of hard to find, and a pink one will go for a pretty penny. You can get something that's an excellent writer. It fits good in the hand. It posts. You don't have to post it. It's probably a little bit, and we'll show that. Of course, the camera doesn't focus. I got it on a zoom. So there we go. We'll show how that fits in the hand. But you know, this is kind of like one of those unsung heroes of the pen world. So hopefully you found this interesting. Thank you for watching. This is my first video of 2017. So have many great writing experiences. Enjoy them. Enjoy life in all of its variety. Bye. A little editorial comment. People talk about whether videos of vintage should be presented, and I find it to be a moot question. I mean, why would you not talk about vintage pens? Why would you not talk about history? You know, look at automobiles, machinery, airplanes. You know, we love the new ones, and I certainly admire a lot of the new car designs, but I certainly also admire the older ones and how things evolve and change. So here's the cover of the Fountain Pen Hospital 2017 calendar. Yes, they still publish a calendar, and I'm on their mailing list. I don't know whether you recognize the pen or not, but if you flip it over, you'll see it's a vintage Mont Blanc from 1952. Crafted from celluloid. So I think that's an interesting indication of how vintage is still very much in most of the fountain pen world, and will continue to be within the fountain pen world. And I feel privileged and honored to be able to present some vintage to my viewers, and hopefully you agree. Might have a discussion about vintage and its appeal to the viewers. Feel free to comment. I'd appreciate it. Let's start 2017 with discussion.